Good afternoon and welcome to the Budget Review Committee meeting. We are somewhat in a shorter time span than we had originally planned, but we're going to begin with roll call. Clerk of Council Davis, can you call the roll?
You, Chairperson Thomas, yes, I may.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Allen. Council Barnes. Councilor Crabb. Here. Councilor Davis.
Present.
Councilor Garrett.
Present.
Councilor House.
Here.
Councilor Huff.
Here.
And Chairperson Thomas is present. Councilor Thompson.
Here.
And Councilor Woodson. Madam Chairperson, it looks like we have 7 members of council present.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. I would remind the councilors and other folks who are on the call, first of all, to mute your mics. Otherwise, we get a feedback and it's difficult to hear. I want to start this afternoon session with just a word of greetings from our mayor and our city manager as we continue in this budget process. So, Mr. Mayor, if you would start us off.
Yes, ma'am. We really just want to thank this group for the work that they're doing. It's always a tough job, but I know it's even tougher this year. So appreciate what you're going through. I know y'all specifically asked about a couple of things last week, and even though people may have seen it during the council meeting, I'll remind them that we intend to begin. We will start to pick up recyclables again on the 1st of June. We're going to have the same work environment, but we're going to slow the conveyor belt down that is used to sort the materials. And that may have an impact on some of the recyclables still going to the landfill. That's a temporary condition. And we had heard from council and we had heard from the citizens that some was better than none. So we're going to be able to get the bulk of it recycled, but did want to let you know that that'll begin June 1st. And also with regards to hazardous duty pay, something to bring to council for the next meeting. I'll be reaching out to all of you prior to that to kind of brief you on what we're looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Madam Budget Chair. Just to be a second, just to say that I emailed out to department heads and elected officials the statement that I made at the budget review session last week. Talked about good news, talked about bad news, and how the pandemic is affecting the nation, the state, and city and county governments. And wanted to just remind department heads, elected officials of that, and to remind them that the situation in Columbus will not be any different than in other cities and counties across Georgia or across the nation. And we've got some difficult days, some tough days ahead. But we can make it through this, but just be patient, considerate in your request, and we'll get through this together. Thank you, Madam Budget Chair.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. To the councilors and to the folks who are watching, we were scheduled to start this budget session at noon, and our council meeting went a little longer than we had anticipated. So we are about almost an hour and 45 minutes behind schedule. So what we have asked to happen, the first item on the agenda originally was a transportation projects update by Deputy City Manager Pam Hodge, and she is going to move that until next week, the May 19th meeting. Hopefully then Sheriff Tompkins and Mr. Flournoy and Mr. Bowden, who are scheduled on here, we won't be too far off schedule to get you your presentation before the council. We are scheduled to end at 3 o'clock, and I hope to be as observant of that time frame as possible. I want to make sure that everyone in the meeting and listening to the meeting understands our process. We will have these three presentations to us. The way that we deal with requests coming to us from department chairs and other folks is on an add or delete list. And in that list, after an official makes their presentation, the council, if there's any counselor who wishes to add an item to the budget, they do so at that time. They say so at that time. Or if they want to delete something from the budget, they say so at that time. And then on May the 26th, our meeting is completely devoted to going through the add delete list and making a decision on whether or not we add something or we delete something. So if you are making a presentation today, it will not be decided today. It will be decided on May the 26th. And for those of you that were listening to the city council meeting, that May 26th meeting is scheduled to start at 2 o'clock. And because the council meeting on that day is scheduled to is scheduled to be held at the Columbus Civic Center, where we can properly distance ourselves, our budget meeting will be held at 2 o'clock at the Civic Center. If that changes and we cannot have the meeting at the Civic Center, we will get in touch with those department heads and other officials who have items that they may want to know about. So at any rate, at this point, we are scheduled for next week, May the 19th, beginning at 9 a.m. And then May 26th, 2 o'clock. The May 19th meeting, next week's meeting, will be a virtual meeting like this one. May 26th, 2 o'clock at the Civic Center. And hopefully we will be able to get back together. Are there any comments or questions or whatever from other counselors at this point? Hearing none, I will turn to our finance director, Angelica Alexander, for her to start us through the next process. Ms. Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Budget Chair, and thank you for providing that very thorough update to the budget review schedule. The first item that I'd like to start with is the add delete list. Typically, I provide an add delete list as council, the Budget Review Committee makes either additions or deletions to the recommended budget. Just starting here with the first item on the add delete list is a staff adjustment to the real estate department. There is a funding for a position that was not recommended in the budget that was still included in the budget for the real estate department. And that correction adds about 0.11 days to the general fund budget with removing that funding. There are, again, the other staff mentioned during the budget presentation last week, the budget neutral reclassifications for the fire EMS department, for the police department, and for the sheriff's department. There's also the item that was added by Councilor Woodson for the district attorney's office to add one full-time victim advocate, G14, at an amount of $46,940. This subtracts 0.09 days from the fund balance reserves. And there's also one item that was added for fire and EMS by our budget chair, Councilor Thomas, for to purchase 9 LifePak defibrillators for fire and EMS at a cost of $342,000, which removes 0.66 days of our fund balance reserves. So the ending total, currently as we stand right now, is 71.88 days in fund balance reserves based on the items that are on the list. So,
Alexander, if I may, that assumes that those two items that we've added will come out of the reserve and that we will not find that money somewhere else already in the budget to move. Is that
that's
correct?
that is
Doesn't
correct.
have to come out of the fund budget, the balance.
That's correct. That's correct. If the funding is identified and council requests a deletion from some other budgeted line item that would offset those additions, then most certainly there would be no impact to the fund balance reserves.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So the next item, there was a question, I believe, by Councilor Davis last week that requested us to reach out to our financial advisors to see if there were any opportunities for a bond refunding. And they have just responded to us this morning. And unfortunately, at this time, there are currently no refunding opportunities available to us. The only bonds that we could possibly refund are 2012 bonds, and they do not have a call date until January 1st of 2023. And so because the federal government did away with advanced bond refundings, we can only refund bonds within 90 days of the call date. So the earliest we could possibly refund any bonds at this particular time would be October 1st of 2022. There was also
let me ask you a question. We just did a bond funding with the local bank, and I think there were no penalties for a payoff or anything like that. Is there an opportunity for us to take advantage of a lower interest rate there?
Not at this time, based on what they provided to us in terms of the interest rate that we have for the 2019 A bonds. It currently carries a 2.07% interest rate, and they do not believe that we could beat that rate in this current market.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. So the last thing was a lease program update, which I'm still actually working on. I hope to have that information out to the Budget Review Committee by the end of this week. With that, I believe those were all the takeaways that I had from last week's meeting. The first department office on the agenda would be the Sheriff's Office. And Jeremy, if you could cue up the presentation for the sheriff. I do believe Sheriff Don Tompkins is in the meeting. Sheriff Tompkins.
I see her there, but she's still muted. All right. You there, Sheriff?
I can hear you. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Yeah, we had a little, something went wrong there for a second, but it looks like everybody's back on board. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to tell you each that I appreciate the job that you have ahead of you. You know, it's funny, in the last several years, we've certainly faced a lot of different challenges with the government center and now with the pandemic. So I appreciate everyone's hard work and commitment to our community.
Is now joining.
Having said all that, I only have one issue. I appreciate the mayor's 2% pay increase for employees. You know, public safety is close to our heart. And so I only have one issue that I would like to bring before the council. The longevity plan, the pay longevity plan. If you'll notice in front of you the chart, it shows you the Columbus Police Department and the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office and some of the different benefits that are available to each of those agencies. If you're hired with the police department, there is a $2,400 Georgia Post certification incentive, which means if you come to the police department and you're already Georgia Post certified, you would get an additional $2,400 increase, at least for the first year, I guess, or perhaps paid out, but it would be $2,400. They additionally offer a $2,000 sign-on bonus, a $1,000 military service incentive, and also a $1,000 relocation assistance. None of those benefits are available with the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office. So I just wanted to make the point that right from the very beginning, there is a difference with the police department and the sheriff's office and what pay and benefits are available. I know that this is a tough budget year, and I really know that each of us are going to have to be very careful managers with our budgets. And, you know, I certainly hope that I have gained council's trust to show that I've been a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars. But there is this one issue that I want to move forward with and bring to your attention. If you could move the next slide, please. In 2017, when we did away with the gap pay, we began what was the longevity plan or the milestone increases. This was in 2017, and if you'll note from the chart there, at 3 years of service, the sheriff's office and police department each get, our employees will get a $1,000 pay increase. Then at 5 years of service, then at 7, and then 10, and every 5 years after that, there's an option or an availability of a bit of a pay increase. So in 17, when we did these things and moved forward with that, this is what the pay plan looked like for the sheriff's office: $1,000, $1,300 at 5 years. Then everything from 7 to 30 years was a $1,500 pay increase for our employees. This, let me stress this as well, this would only apply to deputy sheriffs. This would not take into consideration correctional officers. So in 2019, the Columbus Police Department, the budget was amended so that at year 5 and going forward, their police officers would receive $3,500 in additional pay. And we are still at $1,500. I do realize this is not a great budget year, and I know that every department had a wish list, but I just feel that I have to come and advocate for our hardworking deputy sheriffs, because we will be more than 2 years behind in this reform if we don't ask for it now. And I believe that certainly if the budget had been what we all expected and hoped that it would be in February, I believe this would have gone through. But I understand that it is tough. So, but I still feel that it's very necessary that I bring this issue forward. So if you could move to the next slide. The estimated cost to implement this pay reform for all of our deputy sheriffs, I got with Ms. Alexander in finance, is $136,414. That's pay and benefits. That would give each of our deputies, when they reach those milestones of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, $3,500 increase as opposed to a $1,500 increase. I noted when the mayor did his recommended budget to our office that there was $150,000 set aside that he would assume in salary savings. This would more than fund this additional pay reform for our employees. I do believe there will be salary savings available to the sheriff's office in 2021. But in the meantime, I certainly see that this would cover it. And if council didn't want to do that, $6,414. And again, I just feel that public safety is important. Experience is important. You know, we all know that the way we get things done is by having great people that that are experienced and know their job and can get the job done. So I'm just asking that this be considered to be added to the budget and funded either by the $150,000 in salary savings or in an increase of the budget of $136,414, which Ms. Alexander can tell you a lot easier what that would be, but certainly less than 0.5% of our total budget. And that's all I
Chair,
have. If anyone has
I have a
questions.
question for you, Chair.
Counselor Davis,
Madam Budget Chair, I have a question for the Chair.
go ahead.
Sure.
Sheriff, are you implying that you're going to eliminate spots with the salary savings?
No, sir, I'm not planning to eliminate it, but, you know, in the mayor's recommended budget, he showed $150,000 in salary savings for our budget. And I do know that at this point, we would, and that was the same this year that we're in as well. And we are well on track to meet that. On any given day, we're 20 to 21 to 5 people short, just like the police department is. I believe they're somewhere around 80 plus positions short.
Are you saying you can do this within your budget?
That's pretty much what I'm saying. If that $150,000 that the mayor had put aside and said, hey, we expect this in salary savings, if that is just put back into the budget, I certainly anticipate that we could do it within that.
Well, that's my question. It really, if you're planning to fill those positions later, it's really just a one-time salary savings, and we would have to increase your budget to pay for those other positions. That's not what we did with the police department. We eliminated spots and stayed within their budget.
Yes, sir, I understand. And we've done a lot of different pay reforms, both the police department and the sheriff's office. And, you know, when I came before council before, I said we really do need to look at public safety and really do a comprehensive analysis of public safety and pay reform. But I also understand that right now today, that's just not a reality of where we're going to be. And I certainly understand the budget constraints that the city is under. But what I'm saying is, that not. Is everybody back on? Everything kind of went dark there.
Budget Chair.
There you are.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're back.
Hello.
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost. I didn't hear half of what you said. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. It was doing this previously in our meetings, and it's just really hard to keep up. But you know, my comments.
What she said, I lost.
Look, it's
Excuse me
My
just a
comments
minute. Excuse me, Counselor Davis. Sheriff Tompkins, it sounds like there were several people who did not hear what you said. Would you repeat that so that all of our folks could hear it? Jeremy, can you help?
Yeah, let me see what's going on.
Yes, ma'am. I think we're having a little bit of a problem here. Can everybody hear me clearly?
We can now, at this point.
Okay, I'll kind of say what I said before. What I said was that there was $150,000 in my current 21 budget that was set aside as salary savings. And what I'm saying is I would be willing to continue that, to use that $151,000, which is pretty much the value of 3 positions, to pay for this, if that's what's needed.
Counselor Davis, anything else?
well, that's. I just want to make the point that, you know, number one, I know we're not really talking about longevity. We're talking about recruiting and retention. That's why we put all this together. The way we did that with the police department is it stayed budget neutral. It did not increase their budget, and they had to find the funding within their budget. They chose to eliminate spots. We actually eliminated the 100 officer spots because we just, the city could not fill those spots, and still to this day is having trouble recruiting officers to answer the 911 calls. If that's what you're saying, if you're eliminating spots and you're staying within the budget, I mean, that's, I think you could probably do that without our permission.
Council, and I apologize for interrupting. I just want to make clear, I think they did eliminate some spots. It was about 18 or 20. I don't think it was 100. I'll get that number for you, but I'm almost certain 100.
Out of the, Mayor, out of the 100.
Okay.
I think we're having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I only heard part of what you said.
Understanding everybody.
Counselor Davis, turn your video off. That'll help with the bandwidth. If you'll just stop sharing your video and only share your voice, that'll help with the bandwidth. All right, we'll give that a try.
Anything else?
Madam Budget Chair,
Yeah.
just one point of to note here, as what Councilor Davis was mentioning, for the recruitment and retention plan for the police department, they decided to unfund 16 police officer positions. That was for the recruitment and retention plan. For the longevity plan, which is this pay reform that the sheriff is referring to, for last year's increase in the 5-year mark, the police department elected to unfund 5 additional police officer positions. So as Councilor Davis mentioned, that is how they made it budget neutral. And what the sheriff was mentioning in terms of the salary savings, the $150,000 is a reduction to the sheriff's personnel budget in anticipation of there being some salary savings that she'll achieve in FY21. So council would in fact have to add the funding to the sheriff's budget in order to fund this adjustment to her longevity plan.
Ms. Alexander, does this take into account the fact that there will be additional personnel moving over from the marshal's office as of January 1?
In terms of the salary savings? No.
In terms of the salary savings and in terms of how much this will cost to implement the longevity plan?
I'm going to say no, because those numbers that were put together was before that was officially approved by the state legislature. However, and also I do anticipate that amount though to be nominal. And as the sheriff mentioned, if she unfunded about 3 positions, that would cover this adjustment to the longevity plan in her office.
Okay. Anything else?
No, ma'am, I personally don't have anything else. I think that, I've said all that I can say on the issue, unless you have a particular question.
Is there anyone that would like to deal with this, put it on the add delete list?
This is Councilor House, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to put it on the add list so we can at least discuss it again on the 26th of May.
All right. Ms. Alexander?
I got it.
Okay. Anything else for the sheriff? Sheriff Tompkins, this then has gone on the add delete list. I think it would be helpful to us too if on that May 26th date, we had some idea of how the consolidation with the marshal's office as of January 1 would impact these figures and these numbers, even if it's fairly minuscule. I do think we need to know that. So, Ms. Alexander, if you could work with the sheriff maybe and help pull some of those figures together.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else?
Would it be appropriate if we're putting it on the ad list, you would have to put 3 spots, delete 3 spots on the delete list. Am I right, Finance Director?
That is correct. If we are wanting the sheriff, if the sheriff agrees.
You'd have to delete 3 positions?
To make it budget neutral.
You would have to delete 3 positions?
Yes, sir. So at least 3 positions will have to go unfilled and unfunded in order to make it budget neutral. Counselor House put it on the list. If he'd like to amend that request to make it budget neutral, you can just let me know. If the sheriff agrees to that.
I mean, this is Councilor House. I'm not prepared to make that amendment today. That's why I want to discuss it again on the 26th.
Okay, thank you.
Sheriff, is that what you're recommending to us, that you're going to delete 3 spots?
Sheriff Tompkins, are you still there? I'm sorry, Counselor, we're not getting a response from her.
I'll go ahead and do it. I'll put 3 on the delete list then, and we'll have a discussion.
All right, Ms. Alexander, you have that notation also.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, let's move, Counselor. Ms. Alexander.
So with that conclusion from the sheriff, the next department on the agenda is the Public Defender's Office. And I do believe, oh, there's Steve. Okay, hello, Steve. I was looking for you there.
I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be brief and to the point. Obviously, I've seen the budget book, and we have an overall cut to our budget of 2.3% to the normal budget and 6% on the lost part. The 6% we can absorb because we had intended in the proposed budget to use some of that combined with some money to create an additional slot for another attorney in Superior Court to address the growing caseloads, but this is not the year for that, and we fully understand that. However, in our operating budget, the line item budget, which is a very small portion of our budget, there was some additional cuts, and we're asking to put back roughly $8,600. 2 things that are in play in that budget is the 2 critical things that are in play in that budget are the travel training part, and it says travel schools. It's not so much for training, travel as it is for training. For the last several years, the state of Georgia, under no obligation to their budget, has provided substantial training covering thousands of dollars of training for the attorneys to maintain their CLEs, to maintain their licenses, to do their job. That money was cut in the governor's first round of budget cuts late in the calendar year last year. And obviously, with the cuts we're facing in the state budget, that money won't be restored. And let me just preface it by saying this. Based on the current numbers, our state people are looking at furlough days of 2 or more days a month for the next fiscal year starting in July. The money that we're asking for from the city here covers the expenses of their CLE to maintain their license and for office supplies. The least we can do is to make sure that the attorneys have the physical paper files to work from and the pen and paper to do their job every day. We've always been stingy with our line items, and Generally, and for over the last, I don't know, 4 fiscal years, we've gotten refunds back from the state for the city over $500,000. We try to be frugal with the money. We're not asking for a massive increase. But I think that when we're looking at a major cut to our budget while other court and public safety agencies are maintaining or gaining money, that the $8,000 is not an unreasonable request.
So, Mr. Kraft, you're asking for a total of $8,600?
$8,684, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And it's spread over 3 specific line items. I guess that the finance people would be more detailed about that, but it's all in our line item expense, yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, one
Sure.
thing I'd like to just sort of point out in reference to what Mr. Kraft has stated, the total budget, the operating budget in its totality for the use of funds that are available to the Public Defender's Office, that did not actually change. The operating budget in totality that they had for FY20 is the same dollar-wise in FY21. The difference in the budget for the Public Defender's Office is an adjustment in the amount that we pay to the state regarding the Public Defender's contract. And that contract amount is based on the personnel information that we receive from the Public Defender's Office, and we make those calculations as to what we will pay the state on a monthly basis based on that information. So that is the reduction. I do believe there were some positions that they are filling that maybe had a higher salary at one point, and they're filling those positions with a lower paid person. But that is the adjustment in the overall budget. It's in reference to the contract.
Right. The personnel cost always has some minor increase, and in the overall budget, that's counted for. But at the same time, our operating expenses didn't go down. And so if we're offsetting from our line item budget to cover the increase on the personnel part, it's still a net loss if we don't have those funds available.
Right. Now, there is no adjustment to your operating budget to account for the change in the contracted amount. I just wanted to make that council aware of that.
Yeah, the funding is there to pay the attorneys. The county fund, we call them SPACE or state paid county reimbursed positions, are all safe in this budget. They're not facing furlough days. It's the true state funded employees that are faced with the furloughs. So from an operational perspective, the county funded positions, those attorneys are still there. Now, we have a vacancy there, which we intend to keep open for a little while for a couple of reasons, with the teleworking and the various restrictions on people being in the office. It's impractical to bring a brand new attorney out of law school into the office, because they would literally be sitting in an empty office with themselves and no one to work directly with them. So there will be some cost savings at the end of this fiscal year that the city will be eligible to get some money back again, and most likely that'll be an impact on the next fiscal year as well. There will be some money returned. Basically, we did have to ask for an increase in a couple of these line items because, as I said, in past years, the states picked up the dime for the training for the attorneys. We paid for it in other years prior to that, but the last few years we managed not to really have to spend any of that. But realistically, going forward for at least this coming fiscal year, we know we're going to have to absorb that cost in this line item.
Anything else for Mr. Kraft?
Madam Chair, I'll make the add. This is Councilor Garrett.
All right, Councilor Garrett has put the ad of $8,688 on the list. And Mr. Kraft, you heard me say that we will deal with this on the 26th, right?
Yes, we've been on the ad list in the past, so we're familiar with that.
So you know where you are, huh? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I just want everybody to know that we've maintained operations nonstop since the whole process of the COVID virus kicked in. We had an operational plan in place before the mayor's order, before the governor's order, and we've still been working. The jail population doesn't reflect the caseload, the workload of what's happening. We were able to get a lot of people bonded, slightly different, and rapid resolution is back up and running and has been for a few sessions now. So that's been a positive impact on the jail, and those folks have been working nonstop to address that. The problem is that the caseload remains high, and I've seen an uptick in arrests in the last week or so. I think we're going to be back to what I would have considered the pre-crisis numbers for jail and caseloads. The attorneys that are going to get furloughed are going to be looking at a 10 or 12% pay cut, but no reduction in their workloads. So they're still going to be responsible for the same cases, and everybody is going to do everything we can to ensure that the courts are assisted, and most importantly, our clients are represented. But I just want y'all to know that there's going to we may be coming back to y'all to address a few of those issues later when the state gives us a little more direction. So, but we're going to keep on keeping on. And we appreciate the city's support. The Budget Review Committee's always been very fair with us, and I appreciate everything y'all do for us.
Thank you, Kraft. Ms. Alexander, you have the ad then?
I do. I just would ask Mr. Kraft to send me that detailed breakdown of those items specifically.
Right. I believe in my original email, it had the 3 line items and the specific amounts.
Okay. If you could just resend that for me, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else, Mr. Kraft?
Mr. Kraft, I have a question.
Yes.
The employees you were talking about, the attorneys you were talking about, you talked about some furloughed, and I don't know, we keep breaking up. I think you mentioned some that are not working. Is that right?
Everybody's working. We haven't had to lay anybody off. And at this point, there was an initial furlough by the governor back at the end of the calendar year. But there was some pushback from the state legislature, and we all only lost a day's pay during that process. But we don't have the specifics yet, but we expect some of the attorneys to be furloughed. Now, the way that typically works is they spread it out over the entire year. So there's a day here and a day there, and it impacts every paycheck to some degree, and the attorneys can't work on their designated furlough day. Now, that doesn't mean that the work's not going to get done. That just means they're all exempt employees, and they'll spend the next several days working overtime to make up for it. The work's going to get done. The lawyers just aren't going to get paid.
Are they entitled to any benefits?
I'm sorry?
Are they entitled to any benefits being furloughed like that?
Unfortunately, because it's a furlough, it's not a layoff, they're not unemployed, there are no, and there are folks like me, I'm going to be one of those, and I've got 90 sick days and 45 vacation days. I can't even use one of those to cover a furlough day. It is a direct cut to their paycheck.
Well, I really appreciate you understand the challenge we're in, and there's a lot of things that we'll still be able to look at when we get a better understanding of the financial picture and the health of the city, and I think we're all concerned about that. But anyway, thanks for sharing with us.
And I will say this, because I'm very appreciative of what happened back earlier in the year when the governor announced those, or late last calendar year when he announced those. We were allowed to hold the refund check for a little while in anticipation that some of that could be applied to the furloughed folks. And fortunately, we didn't have to use that, and that money was returned. So again, Columbus has been very good to this office and worked hard, and I appreciate that, because the attorneys really do put forth a great deal of work and push through these things. And one of the things I think that people don't realize is that some of our folks are exposed on a daily basis over at the jail and recorder's court with the same people that the sheriff's folks are exposed to. So while a lot of people are holding remote court, we still have to have interaction with our clients. So you got some hardworking folks out there, and we appreciate all you do for us.
And as we appreciate what you do for us. Anything else from Mr. Kraft? Okay, thank you so much, and we will then address this on the 26th.
Thank you.
Ms. Alexander?
Yeah, so the last presentation that we have is from the Columbus Convention and Visitors Bureau. Mr. Peter Bowden, President and CEO, is on the call. And Jeremy, if you could key up the presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Really want to thank the opportunity to visit with you today and talk about our request. Before we get into the actual meat of things, I wanted to set the stage as what the Convention Visitors Bureau does. We don't want to take for granted that council or citizens or anyone that listening or viewing the call understands exactly what it is that we do. So we don't want to take that for granted. We wanted to also talk about how the COVID-19 is impacting the hospitality industry and the city and what we've done to mitigate that situation. And then we want to talk about the solutions that we want to propose as we move through the crisis. So it bears in mind as we go through this presentation that tourism is economic development. We are the destination marketing organization for the city. And what this means is that it's our primary purpose is to promote Columbus as a destination for conventions, trade shows, and tourism. And we've made great strides in that area because today tourism is big business for Columbus. Next slide, please. So this means visitor spending and jobs, payroll for those hospitality jobs, sales and lodging tax revenue for the city, household savings, and because tourism is a part of that economic engine and that economic fabric for Columbus. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share with you the current hotel occupancy graph that we received from Smith Travel Research. We're going to focus primarily on the teal line there, and you can see that the hospitality industry was hit hard with the onset of COVID-19. As we heard earlier, some of our hotels are temporarily closed, attractions have closed, events have either canceled or postponed. And as a point of reference, the CVB's revenue is based entirely on hotel-motel tax. So the revenue stream has been adversely affected, as you can see again from the graph. Occupancy declined almost half beginning March 14th. However, you can see that as of May 2nd, there is beginning to become a rebound. Next slide, please. So this strategic map is important because it shows the dependency and the responsibility of the CVB within the destination, within Columbus. Our primary responsibilities is informing and educating, advocating the visitor experience. It's developing a destination strategy, and then advising and supporting other marketers that are working within the destination. Next slide, please. And when you look at what organizations and businesses that are impacted by visitors, you can see that the work that the CVB and those of the stakeholders are intertwined. This is just a partial listing of all those organizations that we work with on a regular basis. Our research is telling us, and our travel consultants are telling us, that destinations like Columbus will most likely rebound first in the nation because that first wave of visitors will be the leisure market, and there's a pent-up demand to get out and go. They'll be looking for activities that Columbus is known for and that we've done a great job in telling that story, that allow visitors to practice their social distancing and other travel habits that will emerge as visitors hit the road again. Visitors will look for destinations like Columbus versus first-tier cities because of what's happening across the country. And as an aside, I wanted to share with you that we have researched and made applications for the various stimulus programs that have been offered. However, the CVB simply doesn't qualify for any of these because of our designation as quasi-governmental and a subordinate branch of the consolidated government. So moving forward, knowing that that situation has occurred, we've already reduced our monthly expenses by 17% before today's meeting with you all. And we're looking for more, and staff believes that they can find an additional savings equivalent to 35% before the next fiscal year. So our time here today is to look to the city to become a partner in all of this. And by partnership, I mean that we're looking for the city to invest in the CVB. I think it's important that we are not looking for a handout, to emphasize that we're really not looking for a handout, and that we're looking for creative ways to provide funding and to help manage the program of work until the revenue returns to pre-COVID-19 levels. And with that understanding that there is a repayment agreement in place when we execute the options. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we want to propose 3 options for you all to consider. The first is a monthly line of credit. And knowing that we've reduced our monthly operating expenses to or less than $125,000 each month, this line of credit would not exceed that amount each month and would be used to make up any shortfalls in our monthly revenue. For example, if the hotel motel tax, our check was $115,000 for the month, we would draw down $10,000 from the line of credit. There could be some months when there's no need for funding, but obviously there could be months where we would need the full $125,000. However, our plan is never to exceed that amount month to month going forward. Option 2 is a loan. We've talked to our bank and they're willing to work with us, but would require a co-signature on the note because the CVB actually owns no assets. And we would ask the city to co-sign with us in order to put a funding solution in place. In my communication with our banker over the weekend, she emphasized that this is still an option for us, but it would require full underwriting of the Visitors Bureau and our guarantor. And the third option is to use economic development funds that the city has and works with through the Development Authority and other economic development activities. Again, as I said just a moment ago, these options include a repayment plan back to the city or back to whatever solution we opt to execute. Our guarantee for repayment is using the hotel motel tax revenue. Once we all agree that the revenue stream is adequate and the CVB is no longer in need of cash in order to execute its program of work, we can then agree on a repayment schedule based on the funds that we've actually used. And we've actually done this and had this sort of arrangement in the past, and it's worked out to everyone's satisfaction. Next slide, please. So we're asking that you become a partner with us and to invest in us because of the investment the city has already made in the tourism product. I mean, when you think about it, you have the Civic Center and the Trade Center and the Riverwalk and Whitewater, the Infantry Museum and trails, etc. We're also asking you to partner with us to protect the investment of the private sector. For example, and most recently, there are currently 3 hotels under construction in the Uptown area and a major renovation of a 4th. Hotels throughout the city have also reinvested in their product with renovations. So there is an expectation that we play a role in driving demand for those hotels as well as the Trade Center, which again drives that economic impact engine. Small businesses depend on visitors. And in a meeting with our hotels and attractions, they've all said that they're looking to the CVB to help lead them through this crisis. And we're asking you to be our partner so we can manage those expectations. The next slide, please. And the reason why I wanted to put this slide back up, which is a repeat, is because this is what's at stake, quite frankly. It's all hands on deck now, and as Georgia's 2nd largest city, this partnership between the CVB and the consolidated government is important. If we're going to remain competitive and if we're going to be successful, if we embrace that idea that Columbus is the destination, and it is, for leisure and friends and family visiting relatives and families coming to Fort Benning to see their soldiers, sporting events, corporate business, meetings and conventions, and the list goes on. This partnership is critical and important so that we don't step backwards or fall behind, but actually position ourselves to succeed as a restart the tourism economic development machine for the city. I want to stop here. Thank you for your time, and I certainly will try to entertain any questions that you might have.
Are there questions for Peter?
This is Gary. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Peter, we're all kind of in the same boat here, but I guess I'm wondering, when do you think the tourism type trade will start back? Personally, I think it will be after the mid-year budget. So that would help give the city a little flexibility if we are going to do something. But I would hope that we all would think about obviously the financial situation we are in as a city. We still do not know the impact on our sales tax and that kind of thing. The struggle I'm having with this is a lot of your funding comes from a variety of sources, and we don't know what that impact is yet. So if we are going to co-sign a loan with you, how would you envision paying that back, and over what period of time? What timeline are you looking at? I mean, to me, you're really not going to need anything until everything starts picking back up. I know you have to be ready for it. I know there's some preparedness there, but I guess we just need to talk through some of these things that I've thrown out.
Absolutely, and I understand exactly what you're talking about, and that's where we are today, is that we're actually moving from that mitigation phase into restarting the tourism business for Columbus. And we've looked at several timelines. We feel like June may be one of those trigger points. We're also looking at mid-July, August, and maybe even the fall. And you're absolutely right that there's so much unknown right now. But because of what the expectation is, we feel like is that we need to be ready to pull the trigger when we understand that travel is safe and that the public is going to be moving about. And I simply use that our research as the benchmark for that, is that the fact that Columbus offers most of the amenities that this new travel behavior is going to be most favorable, and that is social distancing, being outside, being able to enjoy the out of doors without danger of creating some sort of conflict with infection and so forth. And we have positioned Columbus for years now as an outdoor adventure. So we are potentially could emerge quicker than most destinations in the Southeast, quite frankly. But I understand exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of big unknown out there. The situation is that we've got to have the workforce in place so that we can continue to work on the plan, so that when it's timely, we can pull the trigger and move forward with that. And as far as the timeline goes, I mean, in talking with Deputy Hodge and the finance director, we talked about we could look at this over every 3 months. We could do a review of this. Ideally, we're looking probably more realistically as a 12-month situation, agreement between the consolidated government and the CVB, so that we can, once we push our program of work out, that there's no interruption, because the second phase of this is meetings and conventions, which is going to drive use of the Trade Center, the Civic Center, other meeting venues that are privately owned in the city, as well as I mentioned in the presentation, the hotels that are being built downtown. There's an expectation that they will also be used for these types of group travel.
Well, I understand the hotels, but the ones that are being built have yet to come online, so it'll be quite some time for them. I guess I need to understand better what you're asking. Are you looking for payroll? You mentioned employees. Is that
Well,
the area you're focused in, or?
We're looking for our operating budget. What we've done is, as again I mentioned in our briefing, is that we've reduced. Before FY21, we're hopeful that we can reduce our budget by 35%. And so this would be everything. This would be staffing. This would be our advertising. Those types of things that we are developing now that we feel are critical in order to tell our story, again, to position Columbus once travel begins. And I think if you look at the Smith Travel occupancy chart, you can see that there's an uptick in that travel behavior. We'll get our update tomorrow, quite frankly, with Smith Travel, and we're hopeful that we'll continue to see that increase. So it's quite frankly to help us move forward the crisis so that we can be ready to generate that additional income for the city from payroll, not payroll necessarily for the CB. When I say that, I'm talking about payroll for hospitality jobs. Maybe one way to look at it is actually this arrangement is the consolidated government's own version of a stimulus package because of the hospitality jobs that could be put back into place, as well as the sales tax and lodging tax that the city would realize from visitors returning to the city for travel and for meetings and conventions.
Okay. All right. Well, more questions to follow, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And we're here for it.
Thank you.
We're here. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, and
Madam Budget Chair, I have a couple questions.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Bowden and I, I kind of somewhat want to take this as everybody's got to have skin in the game, but being a quasi-governmental agency, there are a lot of agencies out there that are struggling right now. They really are, and there's going to be more, and everybody's having to make some very, very tough decisions. I hear what you're saying, but I really struggle with the request because you somewhat put me in a position as a loan officer, and all you're asking me to do is just cover your operating expenses and your continuing budget, but you haven't really shown me that you're making strides in necessary cuts and arrangements to get you through this. You should have. You don't have a reserve or a rainy day fund over there to help you get through some of these situations?
Well, we have enough cash on hand to move us through to the end of the fiscal year if we're careful. And then depending on July 1, we may have another month and a half to move us through that. Now, I do want to address part of what you said with the budget reduction that we're talking about that we'll certainly present to our board later this month at our revised FY21 budget. What we're talking about reducing is almost equivalent to a full penny of hotel motel tax. So we're talking about $687,910 is what we're taking out of the budget. I myself and some of the senior staff have also taken a 5% reduction in their compensation. So we've already put those kinds of things in place. So we've got skin in the game today, and we did that immediately when we saw that occupancy was going to be impacted by travel. And that's why I wanted to emphasize that we've already implemented a 17% reduction in our current budget. And then we're looking for a total of 35% moving into FY21. So I would hope that would satisfy your request that we get involved in this situation.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but it's tough out there, and the people in the hotel business are having to make much more sacrifice than that.
Absolutely.
Much more. And when I look at your agency, it's more of a data collecting agency, and we heard from the director of the trade center today, and she said that they really don't have any events scheduled. They got one coming up, I guess it's a virtual one, or they're doing some kind of effort, but I mean, I don't see things getting any better any sooner, and you know, we're struggling as well. I would want the city, in a situation like this, I'd want the city manager to really, if you're asking the city to get involved, then I think that the city manager, our finance department, needs to really look into your numbers and to see if they can help you make the necessary changes to get you through this until things get better. But we're all having to make those adjustments, and look, it may hurt. You may have to lay some people off. I'm just going to be frank with you. I don't get any money. I mean, none of the investors get any money. We're not getting it. We're just trying to keep our heads above water. And, you know, that's the reality of what's going on out there right now. So I struggle. You know, Councilor Thomas can tell you the same thing. I know the River Center has had to make some severe cuts, and you know, everybody's in that same situation. And I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask, but you know, I struggle without being able to see a better picture of an understanding before I make any kind of decision on a request like this.
And we'd be happy.
I've got to look everybody else in the face too, Peter. I've got to, and you know, it's just tough, and it's, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to have to be a management decision, and you may have to put some of your consultants and people like that on the side until we can get back on our feet and things get better.
Right, and I agree. I'd be happy to meet with the city manager, finance director, and just again, as to address some of the things you've talked about, is the consultants and the research that we've talked about. These people are offering their services at no charge to us currently. So we have not spent money where we have not had to. So again, immediately a 17% increase beginning of March when we saw the occupancy and the travel industry was going to be impacted. And again, almost the equivalent of a full penny being taken out of the FY21 budget. So again, I would welcome the opportunity to sit down with the city staff and have them counsel us, and so that we can satisfy the fact that we have become a lean organization as we move through the crisis.
I heard the city manager getting ready to speak. Mr. City Manager, are you still there?
I am, thank you.
Would you?
Yes, ma'am. I was just thinking through the options that the President CEO, the CVB presented. And I know that we have looked at the option of a loan, but we could not extend a loan beyond the end of the year legally, from what I understand from our lawyers.
The fiscal year of the calendar?
No, the end of the calendar year.
Calendar year, okay.
Based on our lawyer and checking with our bond counsel and so forth. And so I don't know that that's a good option. I think, you know, and I've heard, you know, I heard the budget chair say, and Councilor Davis and others, and I've said, you know, even as we started this meeting, the difficult days that we have, and we do have some challenging days. But one option, because I saw your last slide, tourism is economic development. And I do know that these are going to be, over the next 6 months to a year, CVBs are going to be out there competing for business, trying to get business in their convention centers to their cities. Because there's not going to be a lot of activity, I don't anticipate. And so the ones with the best deal on the table will be the one to land the business. So I get it. Tourism is economic development. But one thing that we may want to look at, budget chair, make a referral perhaps, or have further discussion, or you may not want to discuss at all as an option to try and assist. And that would be when he said tourism is economic development, we've got 0.25 meals that goes to the development authority, and then we retain 0.25 meals. And if we believe that tourism is economic development, and if we believe we have the capacity to do something either out of the 0.25 at the city, the 0.25 at the development authority, or a combination of development authority, ask them to do something, and the city do something out of the 0.25 that we hold. And I just throw that out to the budget chair and council members as an option that would not impact the operational dollars the limited dollars that we're working with, and the declining operational dollars that we're working with that we don't know what it's going to look like. But we do know we have a good projection on hotel motel tax, but that 0.25 meals is there. And we didn't reduce it based on what we think the economy is going to do. It's 0.25 meals. So should we send him to the development authority? Should we look to that 0.25 we keep? Should we ask that we share in helping the CBB get through this from the development side, 2.25, and the city's 0.25 meals? And because tourism is economic development, and we know that he's got to go out there and compete with the rest of the world, specifically those in Georgia, to put heads in beds in Columbus, Georgia, to fill those new hotels, and to fill up that trade center, convention center, and the civic center. That's just a thought, a source that we might look to.
Well, Mr. City Manager, I know that I know that my other fellow councilors rely on your expertise and your recommendations to us. Could you come back to us either on the 19th or on the 26th with a recommendation after you and your staff have talked with Mr. Bowden and gotten a little more information and a recommendation for us? And if it is that we look at the economic development money, which portion of that do we look at? Is there some combination? I've said at every one of these meetings that we've had that we are in an unknown situation. We don't have any idea exactly what's going to happen because we've never had to deal with this before. And so I'm asking you can you look in your crystal ball and come back to us in the next week or two before we have to make this decision and before the CVB has to, do whatever they need to do. I know, knowing Mr. Bowden and the other people who work with the CVB, that they are being as frugal as they can. I know that there are employees that the CVB had before all this started that are no longer working on a day-to-day basis and no longer getting a paycheck. So what do you think, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, ma'am. We'll come back to you. And I heard Councilor Davis about them having skin in the game, and we'll make sure that they have real skin in the game. And we'll, the source that I can think of that would not impact what we are doing on a day-to-day basis, especially considering the unknown of how it's going to impact revenue coming in, would be a funding source that we don't rely on for day-to-day operations. And that would be the economic development money, as tourism is economic development. So we'll look at and come back with a recommendation.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to chime in here, weigh in here? I'm not sure he's still with us.
Budget Chair.
I stepped away. What was the question, Madam
I'm
Chair?
just wondering if you wanted to chime in with, I have asked the city manager.
I heard bring back a recommendation. I think that's a good idea, and I think it's a really good idea to take a look at the amount of money we put into economic development Maybe for this year, we look at some of the more unique aspects of creating economic development, and particularly those like, I mean, the CVB is such an integral part of what we're doing. I know he's already cut his budget by about 17%, and I'm sure there's always more you can go, but at the end of the day, that's not going to get him where he needs to be. And if we want them to remain viable during the recovery period, when we're going to need to really kick up the momentum as quickly as possible, I think the city manager and his staff can talk about that. We can talk to the chamber chair and see what their feeling is about that, and come back with a good recommendation.
So I think unless, I'm sorry, are there other councilors who want to chime in on this?
Madam Budget Chair, I did want to mention to the city manager on his comments. Ms. City Manager, what I'm looking at, I know the organization is somewhat labor intensive over there, and my concern is the funding source. I don't want to open that door. I don't want to open that door where other agencies out there, nonprofits out there that are equally as important are going to come and make the same type of request. I do want you to look at the budget. I know you've had to make some tough decisions at the Civic Center, Trade Center. They've made tough decisions. All the organizations that are dependent on hotel motel tax have made tough decisions. And then decisions, and that may require people in positions having to take on more responsibility. For example, our general managers now are making rooms and making beds. They're having to take on other roles for other people because we cannot keep our heads above water unless we make those changes. And like I said, it's tough times, and you hate to say these kind of things, but management is very key and important here. And I want to make sure, Mr. City Manager, that when you look at that you're comparing it equivalently, and that the right decision, like I said, I can't sit here and make that decision. I'm not a loan officer, and I don't have the access to all this information where I can go in there and take a look at it and make recommendations. But I trust you, I trust finance. You'll work together, and I trust that the repayment plan will be appropriate as well. And I'm sure that you guys can arrange all that. I'd like to see what that would look like in any of your recommendations, Mr. City Manager, because I know you're having to do the same things, and we're telling all the rest of the department heads, those who provide services every day, that what we're having to do as well. So, everybody's got to tighten their belt.
Well, I get, and I understand, and as I said, we will make sure that CVB has skin in the game, and I don't put the nonprofit, the CVB in the category with nonprofits, because, you heard me say earlier in another conversation that when investors call me, I call Pam. Pam gets Brian Solito and gets Peter Boughton, and that's the team. And so they truly work to put heads in beds, and they are competing with other cities and CVBs to do the same. And so what triggered me is his last slide that says tourism is economic development. And then what triggered me to talk about the economic development fund is the fact that he says a stimulus. I mean, what I would consider it, if we go there, would be a stimulus to the CVB to do what they're supposed to be doing to make sure it happens in Columbus. And so we'll look at what they've got in it, and the Chamber Development Authority, and then the city, and how we'll come back with something as a budget chair is directed. So.
And Mr. City Manager, when I first heard that Mr. Bowden was coming to us today, I thought, why is he coming to us? The CVB is not in our budget. So if this arena is not the proper arena for us to make that kind of a decision. If it needs to be at a council meeting, we can do that. But if you will give us all of the all of the information and all of the recommendation that you can, so that we can do the right thing and make the right decision as much as we can.
Yeah, and we'll do that because, yeah, we'll certainly do that, Budget Chair.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Bowden? Okay, Ms. Alexander, you're on again.
Thank you, Madam Budget Chair. And so that concludes all the presentations that we have scheduled for today. Again, as the Budget Chair mentioned, our next meeting will be on the 19th. It will be a virtual meeting and it begins at 9 a.m.
And Ms. Alexander and or whoever is on staff that needs to will get to the Budget Committee between now and then all of the information that we need so that we can move forward on this. One of the things that I would like to hear, and it may not be in this arena, it may be, Mr. City Manager, at one of our council meetings, I'd like to know how our pension plan is doing. I know that the first quarter took a big hit, and so I'd like to know, to have a report on that at some point.
Sure.
Anything else for the good of the order then? If not, I want you folks to notice that it is now 2:56. And so we are a little early, and so, you know, we'll deal with that. We can't add those minutes, though, to the next meeting. Our next meeting is May the 19th, and we'll get an invitation to that so that we can do it virtually. We'll start at 9 o'clock, promptly at 9 o'clock, and Ms. Alexander has sent us, and I know will continue to send us an update on who's going to be making presentations at that meeting. So unless there is something else for the good of the order.
Yeah, Madam Budget Chair, Councilor Huff, just
Yes.
wanted to compliment you on being no nonsense. I didn't believe you could do it by 3.
Thank you so much.
Thank
With
you.
that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.